Look, you have to hear what happened yesterday on NBA Today because it was literally one of the most euphoric and exhaustive celebrations of a single New York Knicks game that I've seen on that show in years. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that Malika Andrews, Brian Windhorst, Kendrick Perkins, and the entire panel spent almost 2 full hours dissecting this historic 146-112 demolition of the Utah Jazz, while simultaneously debating the massive implications of the permanent starting lineup change that Mike Brown made with OG Anunoby's return, and the new role that Miles McBride is embracing coming off the bench, and the way they broke down everything from the 23-0 run to open the game to the 47-point third quarter, to Jalen Brunson's MVP performance, to Deuce McBride's three-point explosion, had everyone in the studio completely engrossed, because this isn't just about the Knicks winning another regular season game. This is about New York potentially discovering their definitive championship identity and proving that when they're fully healthy and executing at the highest level, they can compete with absolutely anyone in the league, including the Celtics and Bucks, who have been dominating the Eastern Conference all season long. Hey, what's up everyone? 1 second before we dive in. That like button right there, hit it now. Takes literally 1 second, but makes a massive difference in growing this channel and reaching more fans. Just smash that like real quick. Every like pushes this video further, so do me that favor right now. So, NBA Today opens, and Malika Andrews has this massive smile on her face, like she's about to facilitate a celebration party instead of a serious sports analysis program, and she immediately sets the tone by showing the final score of 146-112 in giant letters on the screen, while asking rhetorically if anyone on the panel can remember the last time they saw the Knicks just absolutely destroy an opponent wire to wire without any fourth-quarter drama or defensive collapse or offensive drought that kept them nervous until the final buzzer. And Malika provides this historical context that I thought was absolutely mind-blowing. She explains that 146 points scored was the highest offensive output for the Knicks since 1980, which means you have to go back over 4 complete decades to find the last time New York put up that kind of explosive offensive display, and the 34-point differential represented the largest lead the Knicks have had since that same time period, which validates that this wasn't just a nice win, but something truly historic and noteworthy. And Brian Windhorst, who's always been incredibly analytical about betting lines and market expectations, immediately jumps in, pointing out that yes, the Knicks were massive favorites according to FanDuel, with a money line of -1,000, while Utah was at +60-60. Which means Vegas and all the professional bettors absolutely expected New York to win this game comfortably. But Windhorst emphasizes that there's a huge difference between winning by 10 or 15 points, as expected, versus winning by 34 points while setting franchise records in the process. And Windhorst makes this brilliant point about how dominant wins like this matter psychologically far more than people realize, because they build collective confidence within the locker room and send a message to the rest of the league that when the Knicks are healthy and playing their best basketball, they can be absolutely unstoppable offensively while also playing suffocating defense that makes life miserable for opponents. But here's where the NBA Today discussion took a fascinating turn that I thought really got into the tactical implications of what we saw last night. Kendrick Perkins starts talking about the permanent starting lineup change that Mike Brown made with OG Anunoby returning from his hamstring strain that had kept him out for weeks. And Perkins explains that as soon as Anunoby was medically cleared and declared fully healthy, even though he's on a minutes restriction to ensure he doesn't re-injure himself, Mike Brown didn't hesitate for a single second to insert him back into the starting lineup because he wanted to see his new permanent starting 5 in action against live competition. And Perk lists out the starting lineup saying you now have Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, and of course the captain Jalen Brunson. And he makes this point that this is the exact same starting lineup that Tom Thibodeau was using last season before Mike Brown took over as head coach. So there's built-in familiarity and chemistry that already exists between these 5 players that makes the transition completely seamless. Richard Jefferson, who was also on the panel, asks this really important question about why Mike Brown chose Josh Hart over Miles McBride for that final starting spot, considering how incredibly well Deuce had been playing, coming off the bench during the entire stretch when Anunoby was injured. And RJ cites this report from James L. Edwards of The Athletic, where they asked Mike Brown how much he went back and forth on deciding who to start with OG back, given that both Hart and McBride have been really good, and Brown's answer was revealing because he said he was going to start Josh Hart. And it really wasn't even that big of a decision for him. He knew from the jump he wanted to start Hart. But then Jefferson points out that the hard part for Brown wasn't deciding who to start, but rather making sure that Deuce McBride still got 26 to 29 minutes per night coming off the bench, because Brown explicitly said that Deuce deserves it based on his production and impact. So the real coaching challenge was structuring rotations in a way that kept Deuce involved and productive without necessarily giving him that starting spot. Malika Andrews then shifts the focus to OG Anunoby specifically, and his performance in his return game, and Malika provides these numbers showing that Anunoby played only 23 minutes because of that minutes restriction, but still managed to score 11 points on 4 of 8 shooting while being a +7 for the game, despite clearly looking a little bit rusty at certain moments, which is completely expected after missing weeks of games with an injury. And Malika makes this insightful observation about how even in limited minutes and not being in full game shape yet, Anunoby immediately reminded everyone why the Knicks are exponentially better when he's in the rotation, because his size, defensive versatility, and ability to guard multiple positions allows New York to play the switching defense style that Mike Brown wants to execute, where they can switch 1 through 5 without creating exploitable gaps that elite offenses can attack. Brian Windhorst then dives deep into the opening minutes of the game, which he says set the complete tone for everything that followed. And Windhorst describes in vivid detail how the Knicks came out with absolutely frenzied energy on both ends of the court, where they were scoring at will through beautiful ball movement and backdoor cuts and open threes, while simultaneously playing suffocating defense that had Utah completely flustered and unable to execute any of their offense. And here's the stat that made everyone in the studio collectively lose their minds. Windhorst points out that Utah didn't score a single point in that first quarter until around the 5-minute mark, which means the Knicks held them scoreless for over 7 complete minutes of game time, which is absolutely elite playoff-level defensive intensity that you rarely see during the regular season, especially against a team that, despite struggling, still has legitimate NBA players who can score. Kendrick Perkins then jumps in with what I thought was the most important point of the entire segment about why this 23-0 run to start the game was so significant beyond just the raw statistics. And Perk talks about how it sets psychological precedent both for the Knicks and for their future opponents, where New York now knows that when they execute their game plan perfectly and are locked in defensively, they can literally bury any team in the opening minutes before they even realize what hit them. And Perkins makes this comparison to the Warriors of the championship years, where they had those third-quarter runs that were so legendary and demoralizing to opponents. And he argues that the Knicks are developing their own version of that, where they come out of the locker room in the first quarter with such ferocity and intensity that opposing teams basically quit mentally because they know they can't match that level of execution for 48 full minutes. Richard Jefferson then addresses something I thought was really important to acknowledge, because he doesn't want people dismissing this win by saying it was just against Utah, who's been struggling all season. And RJ makes this passionate argument about how he's watched this Knicks team struggle against the Mavericks and struggle against the Charlotte Hornets in recent games, where they played below their level and barely escaped with wins or suffered frustrating losses. So So the fact that they came out and played near-perfect basketball for 48 complete minutes against any opponent, regardless of their record, is something that should be celebrated and validated, because consistency has been the biggest challenge for New York all season long, and they're finally starting to put it all together exactly when it matters most, as they head into the final stretch before the playoffs. But here's where the NBA Today discussion became absolutely electrifying. And this is the part that had everyone in complete euphoria. Malika Andrews starts showing highlights of Miles McBride absolutely cooking from three-point range, and the numbers she puts on the screen are genuinely astonishing. And Malika explains that Deuce McBride hit 7 threes last night and has made 27 of his last 42 three-point attempts over the last 5 games, which is a 64% shooting percentage during that stretch, which is literally elite Steph Curry-level shooting efficiency that you just don't see from guards who aren't established all-stars. And then Malika provides this touching context about McBride's development journey, citing Ian Begley, who reported that McBride's shooting is a product of countless hours in the gym with trainer Juwan Staten, and how this is a full-circle moment for Deuce, who when he entered the league couldn't shoot worth anything, especially not from 3, but never stopped believing in himself and never stopped working on his shooting mechanics. Brian Windhorst then makes this brilliant observation about how now, when McBride puts up a three-pointer, the entire arena chants Deuce, not just because his name is Deuce McBride, but because all the fans genuinely believe that shot is going in, because he's earned that level of confidence through consistent execution over weeks and weeks of proving his shot is legitimate and sustainable. And Windhorst cites last night's numbers, specifically showing that McBride went 7 of 10 from 3, which is 70% shooting, which is absurdly efficient, even on a one-night sample, and he finished with 22 points while being a plus 35 for the game, which means the Knicks outscored Utah by 35 points during the minutes McBride was on the court, which is all-star level impact production coming off the bench. Kendrick Perkins then jumps in and starts getting really animated, talking about how McBride's role technically isn't a new role, but rather a return to his old role coming off the bench. But Perk emphasizes that we've never seen Deuce do this in this role, where he's not just instant offense, but instant destruction, where when he enters the game and he's hitting threes like this, while also playing that suffocating point of attack defense that earned him Defensive Player of the Game last night. How the hell are opposing teams supposed to stop him? And Perkins makes this point about how he doesn't care if McBride comes off the bench or if he starts, because clearly his impact isn't going to be affected regardless of what rotation role he's assigned. He's going to produce at an elite level because that's just who he is as a player at this point in his development. But then Malika Andrews brings the conversation back to Jalen Brunson, who despite all the justified attention being paid to McBride and Anunoby and the lineup change, still had another absolutely dominant game that almost gets lost in the shuffle, because everyone is so accustomed to his consistent excellence. And Malika lists Brunson's numbers, showing 33 points on 9 of 17 from the field, 6 of 9 from 3, 9 of 9 from the free throw line, and he was a plus 37 for the game, which is MVP-level production that Brunson is delivering night after night, while making everyone around him better through his leadership and decision-making and ability to operate both on and off the ball, depending on what the flow of the game required. Richard Jefferson then makes this really insightful observation that I thought perfectly captured why Brunson is so special, and RJ talks about how they spent maybe 2 minutes of the segment talking about Jalen Brunson, and 5 minutes talking about the starting lineup change, and another 5 minutes talking about Miles McBride, a bench player, and the reason that's happening isn't because Brunson wasn't incredible, but because he's operating on another level entirely, where his excellence is so consistent and reliable that sometimes people take his production for granted. And Jefferson uses this sarcastic example saying, "Oh yeah, Jalen Brunson only scored 33 points efficiently, He was only a plus 37 for the game, only 37, as if those are normal everyday numbers, when in reality, they represent all NBA caliber performance that should be celebrated every single time it happens. Brian Windhorst then dives into the MVP discussion surrounding Brunson, and Windhorst makes this passionate argument about how, if the definition of MVP is a player who leads his team to be better and makes other players around him better, then Jalen Brunson absolutely needs to be in that conversation, because that's literally what he's been doing all season long for the Knicks. And Windhorst points out he's not necessarily saying Brunson should win MVP over Nikola Jokic or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Giannis Antetokounmpo, who have all been incredible, but he's saying Brunson deserves to be mentioned in those discussions and receive first and second team All-NBA vote, because his impact on winning basketball games is undeniable and impossible to ignore when you really look at the numbers and watch how the Knicks play when he's on the court versus when he's on the bench. Malika Andrews then shifts the focus to all the history the Knicks made last night, beyond just the final score. And Malika starts listing these records, saying the 23-0 run to open the game was the longest recorded run in NBA history to start a game, which is absolutely crazy when you consider how many thousands of basketball games have been played over decades and decades. And then she mentions that the Knicks were up plus 28 at the end of the first quarter, which represented the largest point differential after one quarter in franchise history, and then talks about how the 47 points they scored in the third quarter set a franchise record for points in a single quarter, which means literally never in the entire history of the New York Knicks have they scored that many points in a 12-minute period. Kendrick Perkins then interrupts and starts talking passionately about how he personally was watching that first quarter, mentally begging that the Knicks would keep Utah scoreless for the entire quarter, because it was so close to actually happening before the Jazz finally scored around the 5-minute mark and ruined the perfect shutout. But Perk emphasizes that even though Utah eventually scored, the fact that the Knicks limited them to only 13 points in that opening quarter is elite championship-level defense that sets the tone for everything that followed, and when you combine that defensive intensity with the offensive efficiency, where they're moving the ball beautifully and finding open shots, you're looking at championship-winning basketball being played at the highest possible level. Richard Jefferson then addresses the one period of the game where the Knicks weren't perfect, which was the second quarter, and RJ points out that New York was up, I think, 28 or 29 points at one point, but allowed Utah to cut that lead down to about 19 points going into halftime, which continues this worrying pattern we've seen from the Knicks over the last few games, where they have this second quarter curse, where their energy and execution noticeably drop off. But Jefferson also acknowledges that despite that small slip, the Knicks came out in the third quarter and scored those historic 47 points, while never allowing the Jazz to make the game remotely competitive again, and the reason they were able to do that was because of contributions from everyone in the rotation, with Deuce McBride, Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, and Jordan Clarkson all stepping up and hitting open or slightly contested threes with the confidence that if they shoot the ball, it's going in. Malika Andrews closes the segment by making this bold statement about how the NBA is officially on notice that they need to fear the Knicks and fear New York. And Malika says that teams around the league think they know what New York is about and think they're the same team they were last season, but they're dead wrong, because this is a different team with a different coach, executing a different system, with different weapon and different identity. And Malika emphasizes that if other teams don't believe that now, the Knicks are going to prove it to them by continuing to play at this level for the rest of the regular season and then shocking the world during the postseason when they demonstrate that New York is here to stay and they're not going anywhere because they have the depth of talent, the coaching, and the collective mentality to compete with anyone in the league, including the championship favorites. What really struck me watching this entire NBA Today segment was how genuinely excited and energized everyone was about what they saw from the Knicks last night. Because this wasn't just analysts being professionally polite about a nice win. This was genuine euphoria and enthusiasm about a team potentially discovering their championship identity at exactly the right time of the season as they head into the final stretch before the playoffs, where every game matters exponentially more. And I think the consensus among the panel was that if the Knicks can maintain this level of execution on both ends of the court, if OG Anunoby can gradually work his way back to full minutes and full form, if Miles McBride continues being this instant offense weapon coming off the bench, and if Jalen Brunson continues playing like a legitimate MVP candidate who elevates everyone around him, then New York has as much talent and depth and versatility as any team in the Eastern Conference, including Boston and Milwaukee, and that should have every other contender absolutely terrified of what the Knicks might become once the playoffs start and the intensity ramps up to another level entirely, where their defense and bench depth becomes even more significant advantages.